Hey everybody, it's Eric Pappenfoos. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day, and as promised, we're here in Niagara, Canada, actually Niagara on the Lake, Canada, just up from the falls, to see the world premiere of Edith Wharton's play, The Shadow of a Doubt. Now we're here at the Royal George Theatre, which you can see behind us. Kathy, you and I have just seen the play. Wasn't it amazing?
Yes, it was incredible.
Absolutely was. We're going to walk around to the side of the theater where it's a little bit quieter and where the box of books awaits. But if you don't know the story of A Shadow of a Doubt, it was written by Edith Wharton in 1901. Now, this is before she's become famous as a novelist. She will eventually go on to be the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction and write such classics as Ethan Frome and Age of Innocence. But in 1901, she decided she wanted to be a playwright. And she wrote this incredible play. And for reasons unknown, the play was never produced. And it was not until 2016 when a couple of scholars researching in, of all places, the Edith Wharton archives in Texas discovered a full typescript of the play, and that put things in motion for the Shaw Festival here in Canada to produce it for the first time ever. It deals with very interesting themes that are very Wharton-esque. It's, I would say it was influenced by Oscar Wilde and Ibsen. Would you agree, Kathy?
Oh, yes.
It's funny in parts. It deals with the plight of women in the Gilded Age, for sure, but it also has a very serious theme, and that is the theme of euthanasia, and that is probably why the play ended up being canceled and never produced. And that brings us to today's book, because Edith Wharton does recycle some of the themes of this play in her third novel, and let's get right to it. That novel is called The Fruit of the Tree. And incidentally, in collecting Edith Wharton first editions, a lot of them, like this, which we have in the collectible rooms at the Scholar, are not very expensive, like $75 or less. Her publisher was Scribner's. We learned today that she had a sort of love-hate relationship with Scribner's, felt that they never really promoted her books enough. You can see in the back of this book, they advertise all of her other books, books by Edith Wharton, including The House of Mirth. But if you look in the front of the book, you'll see that there's this interesting frontispiece of a nurse at a hospital bed. Let me get you the title page so you can see that as well. And The Fruit of the Tree deals with second marriages and deals with euthanasia. In both this play and in Shadow of the Doubt, you have a nurse which takes pity on a person who has suffered a terrible horse riding accident. Eventually, in Fruit of the Tree, the nurse administers morphine. In the play Shadow of the Doubt, it's chloroform. But either way, ends the suffering and ends the misery of the person. Now, for the time, in 1901, this would be an incredibly radical theme. And it's no more radical than the other themes of second marriages and how women must sort of stay true to themselves and how they find just sort of decisiveness and honor in a world that is largely run and controlled by men. So Edith Wharton's The Fruit of the Tree. If you get a chance to come up here to Canada and see this newly discovered play, well, I think it's playing through October. It's well worth the trip. And we'll see you in just a couple minutes at our next site right here in the Niagara Lakes region. We're here now at the McKenzie Printery in Queenston, Ontario, which is in between Niagara on the Lake and Niagara Falls, which has the oldest printing press in all of Canada. And here it is. It looks a little bit like the presses that we saw at the Christophe Plantin Museum, but this one dates from the mid-18th century. And one of its claims to fame is that it printed the act by then the administrator of Upper Canada, General Simcoe, which led to the eventual abolition of slavery in Canada. This very press. You can also see that the Americans were not kind to the press, because when we sacked Toronto in the War of 1812, we burned part of it and it had to be reconstructed. And we're in the shadow, come this way, Kathy, we're in the shadow of General Brock's monument, and I'm going to show you a stereo view of that monument in a moment. But one of the things that you notice right away is that when they tell the history of the War of 1812, it's clearly the Americans that are the aggressors, and rightly so. So here are some of the type cases at the museum. We've got upper cases and lower cases, literally. And what did we do, Kathy? But we printed our own Midtown Scholar indenture right here on this very press. So now we're up to about the 1850s. And look what we set in type. There you go, upside down, Midtown Scholar. And that was a lot of fun. And I wanted to show you the second book that we had in the box. First, the promised stereo view. So this monument of Brock is right above us on the hills above, and that's the site where Brock was killed by the Americans during the War of 1812 in our unsuccessful invasion. And if you want to read more about that invasion at Midtown Scholar, we have the first book, nonfiction work, history book that was published in Upper Canada. And what's interesting about this book, it was published not until 1832. And it really wasn't until then that anyone thought that commercially it was viable to publish a book, a history book, or some sort of thing that wasn't a newspaper or official government publication. It is the memoirs of a gentleman named David Thompson who fought on the Canadian side against the American invaders in the War of 1812. And it talks about how the only mistake the Canadians made was that they didn't invade America preemptively and first. And boy, were the Americans wrong in their perspective here on Canada. We just thought the Canadians would obviously join our cause. And didn't really understand anything about Canadian identity. Look, not only does it say it was published in Niagara, and so Niagara refers to this whole region here, including Queenston, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, and elsewhere, but it was printed by a printer named Sewell. And the story goes that Sewell spent a lot to print this book, and now we know when you're hand-setting type just how much time and energy and effort goes into printing. But Thompson was unable to sell enough copies to pay his printer's bill, and Sewell sues him in the Canadian courts, and Thompson ends up going to prison. So that is an interesting story, the history of the late war, available for sale in Midtown Scholar. Before we go, I want to show you one more room, which is in the back, because they have here at the Printing Museum a working linotype machine from the 20th century. So after the hand printing era, it becomes increasingly mechanical, as you can see. You replace more or less increasing modern technology, but eventually you move to the linotype machine. And this is how all 20th century newspapers used to be printed before digital printing. It's a fascinating machine. All of this lead type would eventually lead to the production of entire sheets. And right here, as they showed us in the museum, first of all, here's a mold made of the entire sheet, but here is one of the last issues of the local newspaper ever to be published before they switched to digital printing. Historical artifact, apparently they still run this machine, and there are probably a very few number of people that actually know how to operate it anymore. Well, thanks for coming here to the Printery. We've got one more stop. We'll see you in a minute at Niagara Falls. Well, we've made it to Niagara Falls, the true wonder of the world. I have to say, I have tons and tons of Victorian travel literature, all of which are really interesting booklets about the falls. But if you know By-Day, you know I like stereo views. And I wanted to share a couple of those with you here today. One of the most famous stereo view photographers in Niagara Falls was George Barker. I really like this view because it sort of shows how the dynamics of the falls have changed over the years. These views date from the 1870s. And as you can see from this other Barker view, they didn't have the safety measures for the early Victorian tourists at Niagara Falls. That's on the American side, right over there at the Cave of the Winds. Some of the other more famous Victorian photographers of Niagara Falls were Bierstadt. I would say there are more stereo views by Bierstadt of Niagara Falls than just about anyone else. And another famous stereo viewer came from New York City and was the great H.T. Anthony. Let's see if you can see the Canadian Falls, the American Falls, the Anthony view. This view also dating from the 1860s. So we have hundreds of stereo views at the Midtown Scholar in the collectibles room. They can be found for as little as a couple of hours a piece, and there was no natural wonder more photographed than Niagara Falls. We're going to end with a funny book, and today's funny book is Awkward Family Photos. And I have to say, I really like this book in part because we've been there and done that. Kathy, do you remember trying to take a picture of the family at the St. Gaudens Monument in Boston? Yes. I think we've had that same photo. But one of the best photos in the book, of course, is the barrel of laughs. Why would anyone ever take a family photo when you're about to plunge to your death at Niagara Falls? Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Please watch next week and every week, Fridays at noon, for adventures in the world of books.